Welcome to the Creepin' It Real show, your one-stop shop for weird news, spooky, otherworldly, and paranormal shenanigans. We'll take a dive into what's going on in creepy pop culture. You can follow us on Twitter at creepin_it and like us on Facebook at The Creepin' It Real Show. Do you have a paranormal story you'd like to share with us? You can email us at creepinitrealshow@gmail.com.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Creepin' It Real. Happy December. This is one of your hosts, Christy. We are one host down today, but I think me and Moni are going to be able to somewhat fill in the blanks. We certainly aren't going to be able to replace that velvety, silky smooth voice he has, and we're going to try to offer his end of the old skeptic part, but that's going to be a little bit of a struggle for me and Moni. So how are you today, Moni?
I'm good. Yes, definitely. We're going to pour one out for the homie today. No, Mr. Yardley, and I will try to bring the skeptic end of the spectrum, mostly from my husband, who was like, I have to come and shit all over your topic. So
tell him next time he wants to shit on it, he needs to actually be there in this flesh shitting on it. Oh,
I told him that, but apparently we have children that he has to watch sometimes. I don't know. Somebody has to take care of them while we do this. So, but here we are, and I'm glad that we both made it through to get to here, especially you, Miss Christy.
Thank you. We are way, way overdue for a show because I apparently caught the plague or whatever the hell it is that's going around. And I went to Florida. We go every year for Thanksgiving. It's our annual trip, I think 5 years now in a row. And I was recovering from the flu before, and 3 days into our trip, it knocked me on my ass so hard that I didn't even get to step foot on the beach the whole time we were there. I was really bummed, but
you couldn't even lay on the beach and die. Like, honestly, at least it's a beautiful place to be sick.
When you're like sick, when you can't breathe, and when you have like boxes and boxes of tissue, and it's affecting other systems of your body, there's no toilets around. Yeah, no, you're not. I stood by the pool and I spent a lot of time in the hot tub when everybody was gone because I didn't want to, like, at night I would sneak down and sit in the hot tub because I didn't want to be sitting in the hot tub going, to everybody. So it is what it is. I was really bummed, and but oh well. I mean, I guess if you're gonna have the flu, that might be the place to have it. So, how was your Thanksgiving?
It was good. I spent it up in a place called Tehachapi, which no one even from California has ever heard of, which is great because it makes it really away from it all. It's beautiful, and it's at my mother-in-law's house, which is set on top of some acreage, and then it's on a hill, and so there's this effect down into the valley as if you're sort of on top of a cloud. That's what the view is like. There's no fences around it. It's really, really beautiful. And, we cook everything from scratch up there. The whole family goes. So my nieces and nephews were there. So I got a bunch of time with them. And, the deers come up to the windows, and it's really neat.
Wow.
So that was fun. And then I have nowhere near as harrowing of an adventure as far as physical discomfort, but I am nursing a slight hangover this morning. Well earned. Yesterday, actually, at work at the library, we hosted our first ever, and I hope to do it again, beer education and tasting event. It was called Books and Beer. And I had a certified Cicerone come down from LA, and he taught a class on the history of craft beer, on how beer is made. Yeah, how beer is made, how you can brew it at home. And then we had samples donated from a San Diego-based brewery called Latitude 33. And we were licensed up the wazoo. That was a pain in the ass. Who knew that prohibition was still a thing? Because, oh my God, it was so hard to get the licensing between the city and the state. But we had staff members. We were pouring beer for people to try. We had a bunch of, like, the library stakeholders were there. The director of the library was there. We don't usually get to do adult events like this. And the Cicerone, I'd never met him before this. And he was like swearing, and he was like busting the library board's balls. And I was like, oh my God. everybody started having a few beer samples and kind of loosening up, and it was a really great time. And I hope we can do that again. But then I went out with all of my colleagues afterward and celebrated a little too hard. So had a great time. And so libraries do cool shit is really the point of all that. You should check out what your local library is doing. And if they're not doing cool shit, you should go harass the librarian and tell them they should be doing more cool shit.
Exactly.
And tell them that you heard that on this podcast. So that's my rant.
Very good. Very good. Well, I have to give Yardley a little shit because I'm not sure why he's not here. He was kind of cryptic about it, but yes. I have a feeling that if he's a Georgia fan, it's because Georgia spanked Auburn yesterday, and it's a major rivalry here, and it was championship, so it was a big deal. So he's probably under a table somewhere sleeping it off, but we miss you, Yardley, anyway. So, well, I guess we can get started with our topic. I decided to do kind of the Montauk project topic and time travel as a jumping off point from our last show, which is now 2 weeks ago, not 2 years, about Stranger Things, because Stranger Things originally was named Montauk based on the subject matter. Anybody that's never heard of the Montauk Project, it was rumored to be a years and years long project, kind of hidden up in northern New York, apparently based off of the Philadelphia experiment. And Stranger Things was actually inspired by the rumors of this Montauk Project. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of cover that, since it was literally going to be named Montauk, and kind of what that means, and a few of the rumors and things that apparently happened up in Montauk. So, but first, talking about Stranger Things, apparently they've been renewed for season 3. So,
yay!
I know, I'm really excited, but I have a lot of questions. I don't know if you heard or read anything about this, Moni, but they are saying that they're going to do a present day. So they're jumping to present day.
Boo!
But
how is that going to work with the kids' ages?
I don't know, but here's the deal. They're also, they would be like my age. I mean,
so they would have to recast the whole thing?
Well, here's from what I've read. This is what seems to be happening, and this is a guess of mine because they're not being really clear. Is they're going to have present day versions of themselves, but also these characters are also going to be in there as look backs as past, So I don't know how, I don't know. This is my guess, because if they're saying they're doing everything in present day and they're also renewing this cast, I don't know how that's going to work.
Maybe the present day is the upside down.
Maybe. But they said, and I quote, one of the Duffer brothers said that, no matter what we want to do, I remember when we were originally talking about season 2, we wanted to just start it in Christmas and just go from there, from back then. But then realized the kids were just too old, so we had to jump forward. So I don't know. I don't know how they're going to do it. I'm going to be interested on how they're going to pull that off. And because they're already saying that the original cast is banding together and demanding all equal pay. So apparently they're gonna be in season 3,
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, I don't know. And then, maybe also these quotes are misdirect, because that's not the first time that a show gains popularity and then the showrunners say a bunch of shit to misdirect the fans and make them go all crazy, and do nothing of the sort. So let's hope it's that, because I don't know, maybe we should trust them. The last 2 seasons have been really great.
Yeah.
But we'll have to wait and see, because I don't love that idea.
I know. I am going to be positive about it for now, and then wait and see how they're going to pull it off. But this cast is probably one of the most beloved casts I've seen in a long time.
Yes.
So taking
And the
that
nostalgia is
away.
half the fun. Yeah.
Yeah, and then like taking them away when they're so beloved and people have really attached themselves to their little group and network as who they are, it could really put a huge wrench in the whole success of the show. So we'll see. Maybe they're going to spend like half the time talking about what happened after season 2 in season 3, but just in the present. I don't know. That's my guess because I don't know how else you're going to do it. So
you should write it, is what you're saying.
Yeah, right. It'd go really off the chain if I was writing it. I don't know if you guys have figured out the dynamic of the three of us, but I'm, me and Moni are pretty out there. I would say I'm probably the worst of us all. I don't know for sure because...
Is it called worst? You're the most out there of us all.
Out there of us, the most ridiculously buy anything naive of them, maybe.
One could argue the best of us. You don't know.
Depending on who you are, I think, as a listener. But I love conspiracy theories. I love the unknown. I love possibilities of things that... I mean, let's be honest. This is a huge universe. We know nothing. And we think we know everything, but we really don't. Is every single thing out there that's a conspiracy theory true? No. But I am the person that can really get out there and go down that rabbit hole really far. And then Moni is, because she's a librarian and inherently a researcher, is a believer in a lot of things, but also gets pulled back by facts somewhat.
Damn those facts.
Exactly. And then Yardley he probably very much deals with us and tries to throw some, trying like a dog, trying to throw the dog some treats, some fact, all right, yeah, that's possible, but let's really be honest with ourselves and throw out some real possibilities of what this really is. And so we all kind of balance each other out that way, and we don't have our anchor, so we got a bunch of sails running around on this show, so be prepared. And this is probably one show that we need Yardley the most, because time travel is lots of theories out there about time travel. So
I mean, at least we're sober today.
Exactly.
So without our ship captain, we might be able to just sail around the rocks. We'll find out.
Yeah, I mean, oh my gosh, if I was a bottle in, we'd be talking for 3 hours about this. Seriously, I would be off. But so I want to talk about a little bit about Montauk. I'm really shocked, as I went and started doing research, Moni, and I don't know if you felt the same way, just what lack of really, there's no movies about this. There's a couple of shows that I wasn't really like impressed with. And excuse my dog growling. I don't know what she thinks she's growling about. We're on the second floor. But and there was a lot of lack of information. I mean, you've got a lot of people talking and saying that they were involved in the projects, but there was a book, and I briefly read a little bit of it and was like, I mean, it's kind of dry. There's really not a lot of shows. I mean, when you've got a lot of conspiracy theories around, there's always shows that do, think topics on it and everything, and I haven't seen much. And so I was kind of shocked that the Philadelphia Experience has one movie, Experiment. I don't know if I said experience or experiment, but Philadelphia Experiment. There's one movie out there. I guess there's another one that was like sci-fi, but it's basically the same as the original, just remade. That's it. That was it. And then the Montauk Project, there's a book. That's it. It was kind of like, all right, well, so not a lot of information to go off of, so I decided, okay, we can't do a whole show on this, but I wanted to just kind of brush up on what the alleged experiments were. And I don't know if you know any of these, Moni, but apparently the biggest brunt of Montauk Project experiments was mind control for the military. I mean, it was a military base, and they were all about mind control, which, of course, is exactly what Stranger Things is about. I'm pretty sure, and I'll ask you, I mean, pretty sure this was for weapons, basically,
Right.
fighting our enemies, Russia being one, Germans being one. And there were several different projects that they had been working on. One of them being basically, if you have an object of somebody's, like 11 on Stranger Things, where if you have an object of somebody, you can hone in on where their location is. So that was one of them. And there is a guy that says that he was an engineer for these projects, and he was too valuable as the engineer to be able to involve himself in any of the actual experimentation, but he claims that they had abducted lots of orphans and runaway kids and basically broke them down into, brainwashed them, broke them down as a human to then build them up as the way they wanted them to be for these projects. He said they lost a lot of them to time travel when they were first kind of messing around, and a lot of them didn't come back. He said another guy who said that he was one of these children was actually went back in time, came forward in time, and he was not lost, obviously, because he's talking. And that's kind of, they did a lot of LSD, he claims, the boy claims that, when he was back there. Now, I have to ask you, part of me, because there's so much lack of information, and there's really only so far, I think like 2 or 3 people that have come forward and said, yeah, I was part of this. But I don't know. I think it's possible that the government has researched and experimented with things like this, to use as weapons, but to have this much, have gone this far, I doubt. What are your thoughts?
Why Montauk? You hear about Roswell, you hear about Skinwalker Ranch. We talked about that, what was it, in Arizona? That
Area 51?
Farm?
That was
up for sale. There are these areas that get these reputations, and what's the real reason that any specific area gets a reputation like this? But it is interesting because Area 51 has so much information available, whether true or fake. And Montauk, you're right. I did try to do more prep work for this show and felt underprepared, but I think that was in part because, like you said, there's not a lot out there to be found. And I just wonder if there could be something to that, or it could be because there's nothing at all. And I know that's really kind of a non-answer.
I know. They, when they go in and they go to this laboratory, it apparently has been completely filled with cement. So you can't, the laboratory exists, there is a base there, and it is shut down. And when people, Camp Hero is the name, and when you go, you're not allowed to enter, but of course people don't. People break the laws all the time, so they go in there, and the laboratory has basements, but they've been completely filled by cement, which that's kind of interesting to me. I don't know why you would fill, maybe to keep people from dying when they knew they were closing it, or maybe they were trying to hide stuff. They're saying that they did open dimensions down there and things like that. I don't know. Did it look like the underworld or otherworld? I can't think of the name of it on Stranger Things.
The upside down.
Upside down. Did it look like that? Who knows? Was there like a huge, opening with weeds growing out? Who knows? But I found that interesting. That why did they cover the whole thing up with? Why did they fill it with cement? That's pretty dramatic. But
yeah, it is, and kind of expensive. Not the cheapest option either. So
exactly. So that's really all I wanted to kind of dive into Montauk, because Stranger Things was inspired by it. But I had never heard of Montauk. I have heard of Philadelphia Experiment. I watched that movie when I was a kid and always, read stuff about it, but I had never heard of Montauk until I read that Stranger Things was inspired by it and was originally named Montauk. And so I was kind of perplexed, and it definitely intrigued me to kind of look and see what that was all about. And there just wasn't enough in there. I mean, I would love to hear. I mean, okay, so there was a lot, but even I, reading some of it, was going, whoa, okay. I mean, there are some people, like if you read the Montauk IMDb pages from the few shows that have been talked about on there, there are some people in there commenting, and whoa, I mean, it'll hurt your
the
brain.
minute you said LSD, I was like, even I might be out after that. I'm like, LSD, that explains a lot of things. So.
Yeah, and I mean, there were some people in there that were like, what about the aliens? What about, you didn't even brush up, you didn't even talk about this and this and this, and I'm going, whoa, okay, yeah, I think you're
Not
a little far out there.
Could happen in one place. Let's just put it that way.
Exactly. So I just kind of, all right, you know, I
feel like
the
government that's doing these experiments is like, whoa, guys, whoa, we are only zoned for aliens and time travel in this location, okay? We can't be having the ghost experiments and, you know.
So with the question, after talking about Montauk and then what topics we're going to talk about later, I have to ask you, I mean, do you personally believe in time travel?
So I was actually talking about this again with my skeptic husband this morning, because I was like, I'm so unprepared. Just, you know, talk this out with me a little bit before I go on. But, you know, because he's Mr. Skeptic, doesn't believe in any of this. And I said, if not time travel, then what about alternate dimensions that sometimes bleed through? So, you know, that's one thing that they say, like, you know, we've talked about the Queen Mary before and how they supposedly have a vortex. Things like a vortex are supposed to be places where the, you know, whatever it is between one dimension and the other is thinner, and sometimes things can be seen or come through. And what if that happens when, say, you see these photos that supposedly are not photoshopped or whatever, of someone that clearly has some kind of technology that doesn't belong where they're at, or is wearing things that shouldn't be where they are. That being said, I do have an article that debunks a lot of the ones that, like, for instance, the hipster that you have here, will post it, but the time traveler caught on tape, and it has the circle around the guy wearing the sunglasses. I did find a debunking for that one. And, you know, but, you know, the one we're going to get into, John Titor, Titor. Oh, John Titor, that we're going to talk about a little bit later. You know, there hasn't really been a great debunking for him. And you know, part of it is because his predictions are subject to, you know, wait and see. We haven't gotten to 2036 yet. And, you know, and sometimes things can be fairly cryptic. So maybe kind of like a horoscope where it can be a little bit open-ended, like maybe great fortune will come upon you. Well, it depends on your definition of what fortune is.
Exactly.
So, you know, it's hard to say. Just to answer your question, you know, you know me, I don't believe anything is impossible. And if not time travel, then definitely other dimensions somehow interacting with one another.
Yeah.
What about you?
I believe that, I believe in time travel. I don't believe that it's been invented. I believe it's accidental, like kind of like you were saying, like vortexes. I've heard lots and lots of stories from people coming from hundreds of years ago that said this happened to them to the present. This people say, like, some dude said there's like a vortex under his kitchen sink, and he accidentally like fell through it and met his future self, and they had the same watch on and everything, and he even took a picture with his cell phone.
And then I read that, I mean, it might have been that one. That sounds familiar, and it ended up being a commercial for like life insurance.
Probably,
like that.
yeah. But like there was one from like hundreds of years ago where this guy said that he was, you know, driving into town, and all of a sudden, instead of certain things, the buildings were different, and it's all, you know, and he swears by it. He swears this happened, and then he walked through a shop, and the shop wasn't that shop anymore. It was a shop from 30 years later, and you know, just different things like that I've read, and I personally believe that, yeah, it's a possibility that the Earth, you know, has different spots where you accidentally can walk into another dimension or walk through time. I personally think that's what the Loch Ness Monster is. There must be like a portal down there where, back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, there was stuff swimming in that loch, and, that's probably a different, it's not the same one every time.
You said that. You just illuminated something for my whole childhood. Sorry to interrupt, but my mind is blown, because now I grew up with, my father was a game warden, which is a full-blown police officer, but for wildlife, fish and game.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And his whole thing with even the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot and that kind of thing is that these things can't exist without more of these things.
Right.
And that something that large cannot exist without a whole lot of food to eat if there's, more than one of them living, which there would have to be. Mm-hmm. So sorry, you saying that it might be coming in and out from somewhere else, if it exists, that really can be like the only explanation.
Oh yeah,
so
of course.
You just blew my fucking mind. So wow.
Sorry. But I've believed that. I mean, I've believed that since I was a kid, that there's something like a door down there in the water, and it's not just one. It's not just Nessie. They're all there, and they're just coming through and swimming back in. But it's not the same one. It's just different, and that's kind of what I've always believed, and I think could be the same thing for a Yeti or for anything because my whole theory is where there's smoke, there's fire. And when you get so many claims of certain things, something, now, is it exactly what we're saying? No, because we just don't know. We don't have the education, information of what this is or what it could be. My mind is that it's something. Now, what is it? I don't know. But for this many people to sit down and say they have accidentally traveled forward or back in time is something's to it. Now, are they accidentally seeing the future? Or did they travel forward or backward? I don't know. I believe it has happened accidentally before. And there was a man that actually got hit by a car, and I am going to completely botch this because I don't know the dates. But
I think I saw that. Yeah, and then he's the one, oh shit, and I had it up and I don't right now.
Yeah.
But he was the one who got hit by the car wearing like old-fashioned, like 1800s clothes.
And didn't have any ID on him, right?
But he had a letter from the 1800s in his pocket, and then they were able to identify him somehow, and it turned out that he went missing in the 1800s. Yes. I'll have to look that up because I was going to post that on Creepin' anyway, because it was like 10 different stories that were then unexplained, and that's what led me to go and debunk some of them, but I did not find a debunking for that particular story.
No. And I mean, that's pretty interesting, because if you think about it, this dude's walking down the street and accidentally, walks forward in time, and instead of horses, he's seeing cars. I mean, I cannot even imagine the shock that would happen to somebody, that would happen to. And probably walked out in the middle of the street and got hit by a car, just trying to figure out what the hell's going on. So
I have to tell you a weird story related to that, actually. Yeah. So I used to work in downtown Orange. It's a really historic district. It still exists. Some of the buildings are well over 100 years old, which in America is pretty old. And Steven Spielberg and Tom Hanks, they've done a few films there. I can't remember. I think it was That Thing You Do was filmed there. There's been a lot of movies filmed in that area. But they were filming That Thing You Do. And there's this belief among people who really believe in spiritual things that there's a time of, twilight, right when the sun is going down, just before it turns full dark, that supposedly, basically, our dimension is somehow more fluid and you can see easier into the next one. Mm-hmm. Because one of my coworkers who really believes in that kind of thing used to run to the front of our 120-year-old Carnegie Library and watch that moment as the sun went down and look down into that old town area. Mm-hmm. And she swore she could see basically like what it used to look like with the horse-drawn carriages going through and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So Tom Hanks told this story actually in the media that when they were filming That Thing You Do, he was walking around at that time of day, and he looked up and he saw a little boy dressed in like 1920s era clothing, and he actually went and asked Spielberg, like, was there an extra dressed like that? Are we filming some kind of different scene that I didn't know about? And, of course, nobody knew what he was talking about, because
Wow.
that was not what was being done at that time. So, again, if not time travel, maybe, like we said, parts where the other dimensions can coexist for moments.
Yeah, and that is where I want to bring in, after you talking about that, the dimensions, time travel. I want to talk about John Titor. And I have been following the John Titor story since 2010. Actually, he started communicating year 2000, but I had not heard about it until 2010, because I, really got into realizing, hey, I love all this crazy stuff. I can actually look this stuff up on the internet. And came across his story from Coast to Coast, because that's a big show on the radio,
right?
Which talks about all kinds of crazy shit. And Art Bell is the host. And I used to love when we would travel listening. I would beg my parents to put Coast to Coast on. And so he does this segment, and I can't think of the name of it, but he would do a segment every show, basically reaching out to hear about people's stories, wanting to get, like, hey, time travel being one of them, or paranormal, or anything, basically. And he got a fax from a man who later became known as John Titor. And the fax is basically saying that he comes from the year 2034, and that's, well, I think he's from 2036. And he says time travel was invented in 2034. And it came from, I don't know, it's some singularity engine based with magnets and everything. And I could go in and I could read all of that, but it's, unless I think you're a nuclear scientist, it kind of blows your mind. But what he's talking about is actually extremely, he knows what he's talking about. He's either done one hell of a good research before, talking and inventing the story, or he's telling the truth. And he's saying by altering the speed and direction of rotation, you can travel both forward and backward in time. Mm-hmm. And he decided to travel through a vehicle with this machine strapped to the back of it, a truck or a Jeep or something. He said, when you go back in time, you travel on your original timeline. When you turn the singularity engine off, a new timeline is created due to the fact that you and your time machine are now there. So basically what he's saying is, when you go back in time, you're going back into the time that you were in. But because you're back there, it's creating a new dimension. So you've then now propelled yourself, and now a new dimension is starting because you're there and you don't belong there. You're from the future. So he says some of the interesting outcomes of this are, one, you can meet yourself. And he says, I have done it often, even taken a younger version of myself along for a few rides before returning myself to the new timeline and going back into
How does that not fuck up your life, though? You see all these movies like Butterfly Effect about how you change one thing. How can you take yourself like around and not have that screw up your life? Is like,
I don't know.
The whole point of aging is to gain experience through, your first time of doing things instead of, I don't know. That's crazy. I would be so scared to do that.
I know, me too. It would freak me out. And he says, you can alter history in the new universe that you have just created. Most of the time, the changes are subtle. Sometimes I'll notice a car model that doesn't exist or books that come out late. He says, unfortunately, it was also discovered that anyone going forward in time from my 2036 hit a brick wall in the year 2564. He said, we want to discover the reason why there is no apparent future after 2564.
That's not good.
So now, after writing this, everybody got on this message board and started trying to communicate with him. Everybody had a million questions, of course. And he's saying, excuse me, he's saying that Y2K was a huge disaster, and somebody traveled back in time and fixed it. So our dimension, that didn't happen. But in another dimension, Y2K ended up very much being almost the end of the world for that dimension.
Whoa.
And then somebody traveled back in time and fixed it. He claims that he was traveling back in time to find a certain old computer. I think it was like an IBM 5100, which he's saying that computer was the last one that was produced that didn't have a certain setting in it, that actually IBM has actually verified this is true. And because of that, whatever it does aids in time travel. And they've used all the computers, that were ever left back, up in the future. So he's going back now trying to find a new one to take to a new future so that he can travel back in time to find his old dimension. So apparently, if you travel forward enough times, you'll eventually hop back into your dimension that it's possible that you could hop back into the old dimension you were at, that you left. So it's crazy what he's claiming. Some of the things he claims actually have come true. And some of the things that he's claiming happened later, but did happen. Because we're talking about the year, he all claimed this in the year 2000. Mm-hmm. So it's what he's saying, he's from 2036, I believe. Yes. So we're halfway there. So we can sit down and look at everything that he's claimed and check and see. Now, he disappeared for a little while, and then he came back. And he came back as, he starts on these boards again saying he is John Titor, but a different one from another dimension, and that they've decided to use this message board as communication with each other, like checking in to see where either everyone is. And even his mother got involved and said, yes, this is true. And John Titor is now a little kid. And I think it was 5 years ago, she, said, yes, older John Titor did come back and hung out with me and young John Titor. And it's just bizarre. And I think, the easy part for him is to say that these things happen. And if they don't, then he's talking about another dimension that he was in. He can kind of play it off as... that's convenient, though. It is awfully convenient. But now here's some interesting things that I found interesting that, that how he couldn't know. One is he says that scientists will come out in the next 5 years and say that other dimensions do exist. And they absolutely did. In 2005, scientists came out and said other dimensions are possible and they do exist. So I found that interesting. I mean, that's pretty specific. That's not something that, if it didn't happen, he could easily say, oh, that was just another dimension. But the fact that he was so specific and that actually happened is interesting to me. He is saying there was supposed to be a huge civil war here in the United States in 2015, which didn't happen. So I don't know if that means what that means. I don't know if that's basically another dimension or somebody changed, the future so that...
Well, he also claims in 2036, which we're in 2018, so we're getting there.
Yeah.
That food and livestock will be grown locally, that people will spend much more time reading and talking together face to face, that religion is taken seriously, and everyone can multiply and divide in their heads. And we know that we're heading towards idiocracy.
Exactly.
This has to be another dimension unless something significant like the internet explodes and no longer exists. changes, because
Well,
there's no way that
he claims the internet it does exist then, but he also claims that 3 billion people die between a war and he says a version of mad cow disease will also hit, and it will wipe out a lot of people. And this is why they have started growing their own livestock and stuff, because mad cow disease like somehow gets off of cows and turns into a human disease and kills, millions of people, and then this war kills millions of people. So he said the Civil War kills off a lot of people, so I'm thinking that's where all the dumb people die. I don't know, but I don't know. He says he describes the Civil War as a Waco type event, and it starts in 2004, but it steadily gets worse until 2015 with a very short World War III. And he says the Russians are the ones that we end up fighting in the World War III.
Believable.
So, I mean, based on our political climate right now, I can see this. Of course, 2015's already gone, but maybe in another dimension, it's 2020, or I don't know. Interesting theories, and I mean, some of it you, of course, could look up and say, well, duh. I mean, that's possible to happen. I did look back in 2000, and I didn't see much to do with mad cow disease back then. I mean, there were some issues, and then a few years later, it became a major concern and worry, and then it kind of disappeared. So, I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts?
So if I wake up in 2036 with the ability to multiply and divide in my head, and I've survived all this other stuff, because I may just be one of the dumb people that ends up not making it. Then I will let you know. But I definitely reserve judgment on this. It's very interesting. It reminds me of someone who has watched Terminator a lot, and instead of John Connor,
John Titor. Very close,
exactly.
Right?
Exactly. I don't know, because I mean, it's like the new Nostradamus, right? Like it's and again, there is no way to verify, because. And I know you're going to disagree with me, and sometimes when it suits me, and so that's convenient, I believe in horoscopes, but it's also a thing where it's very open-ended, and it's very like,
of course,
you know, it could go either way. And I guess, like you said, I'm the moderate. We'll have to wait and see till 2036 or before, if the dimension changes. So that's a very movable narrative that he has made there for us. It's interesting that his mother's in on it. I wonder, what I would like to find out is if they're making any money off of this. That's really
no, they're not, and that's the thing.
To.
So I listened to a show, a podcast. Shoot, I can't think of the name of the podcast, but I will post the link of it up with our show, and they end the podcast by saying, this man has made no money. There's nothing to sell. There's nothing to buy. It's just, this is just what he's saying. And we don't even know who he is. He's gone now again. There's no secret. Nobody's paying for anything. Nobody's making any money on this. So I guess that is an interesting addition to what is his end game. What is the purpose for this?
I wonder if anybody's ever investigated him being gone too. Like, what does that look like? What does that mean? If you hired a private dick, would they find where the last place he spent money was? Would they find who this child is that his mother's claiming is him? Like, it's just kind of interesting.
I don't know if anybody's taken it that far. I don't know if anybody even knows where he lives. I need to look back. I know he apparently claims to have come back just a couple of years ago, but everybody doesn't believe that's really him. They think that's just some crazy dude who's saying, just some crazy dude, which in theory, John Titor is crazy. So, who knows? But the guy that came back just a couple of years ago was not the same as far as details and knowledge and confidence of what he was saying. It just didn't, they weren't really, nobody was really convinced that this was him. I'm sure there was a few people that were, but most weren't saying this is not really him. He's not, he wouldn't say these things. It's almost like they think they know him, you know? So a lot of people started asking him questions, and he starts answering, and this is the apparent, like, original John Titor. He made a list of things for people who are going through the next, few decades to do, and he says, do not eat or use products from any animal that is fed and eats parts of its own dead. Oh, now that's interesting.
Well, that should be any time, because that has been proven to, like, cannibals get certain kinds of cancers and stuff,
Right. Well, do we, in this,
we don't know what shit people put in there. Yeah.
And this the whole theory of why they grow their own food and take care of their own animals, and because of this problem, apparently. And he says, do not kiss or have intimate relations with anyone you do not know. Well, I mean, hello.
That should be any time anyway, also.
Yeah. He said, learn basic sanitation and water purification.
Oh, good. My husband works in infiltration, so that's good.
Maybe we'll be moving over to San Diego or, near that area for you. Be comfortable around firearms and learn to shoot and clean a gun.
All right.
He said, get a good first aid kit and learn to use it.
All right.
Find 5 people within 100 miles that you trust with your life and stay in contact with them.
Well, this is SoCal, so that's fucked because, yeah.
Get a copy of the U.S. Constitution and read it, which you'd be surprised how many people haven't done that.
Yeah, or the Bible, or any of that stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, he says eat less.
Okay.
I need to do that anyway. So
I drink just as much. Is that okay?
I'm on the John Titor diet. Get a bicycle and 2 sets of spare tires and ride it 10 miles a week, which I do that, so I'm cool with that. Consider what you would bring with you if you leave your home in 10 minutes and never return. He says that the war was a result of faulty politics and desperation from Western leadership during the U.S. Civil War. And he says, "The
fuck you say? You say we're headed towards that? I don't know what you're talking about."
Exactly. Which is kind of interesting to me. I don't know. He says that there were some biological weapons and chemical weapons used in this upcoming or possible war. No mind control weapons, but there are new non-lethal weapon systems that turn out to be quite lethal. So, he said,
actually, I forgot to mention this when we were talking about Montauk and possible government experiments that could have been going on there. And you're talking about non-lethal weapons that turn out to be quite lethal. I don't know if you've ever heard, sorry to interrupt, but holograms. That the government has been unleashing holograms during certain battles. So, for instance, instead of UFOs actually being real, they could project one.
Right.
And people would then be so scared they would run away or kill themselves or whatever, or project, say, a religious figure to a certain type of army, or just different things they could do to scare the shit out of a different army until that army, either gives up or kills themselves or whatever. So that is something that very vague prediction could be talking about.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and he also says that there are, in fact, somebody even specifically asked if there's hologram cameras and stuff like that. And he said, no, there are holograms, but not really with cameras or anything. So they're not used day to day by people, but there are in fact holograms. So interesting that you brought that up. He says that AIDS, there is still no cure for AIDS, and there is actual progress on cancer by that time.
Okay.
So I don't know. I think this is really interesting. I don't know how, when people ask you a question and you don't know what that question's going to be, to have that much detail is really I don't know. It intrigues me very much. I can't say, oh, I 100% believe he's from the future. But dang, I mean, talk about detail and knowledge of
I'll tell
things.
you what, though, on the other hand, like as someone who's kind of got anxiety like I do, and as someone like my husband who's just kind of always prepared for a lot of
Mm-hmm.
things, a lot of that stuff we kind of, I mean, we don't have never actually practiced what we talk about, but a lot of the things on that list we've at least discussed doing. So, that some of that is just disaster preparedness. Like we live in a state where there's lots of earthquakes and that could happen any time because there's no prediction for it. We live in a state where there's lots of fires. So, to be able to get out of your house in 10 minutes, the ability to have a bicycle, have neighbors that you trust that you could go to, like a lot of that kind of stuff. I mean, the
Mm-hmm.
eating less is a good idea, like,
Yeah,
so that you could go longer with less. And a lot of those things are a good idea in theory that no one will ever practice. But
exactly.
and that being said, I'm the first fat, happy cattle to be picked off the herd when something bad does happen because I am the most out of shape, slow
We really,
person.
we
But
really need to start taking those "Will you survive the apocalypse" quizzes and see where we rank. But one other thing, real quick. I know we talked about the computer that he's looking for. His job is to go back to 1975 to find this computer. And this is really interesting to me because I don't know who this guy is. If he's really is just from here, maybe he is a huge computer nerd, but he says that the 5100 had a very simple and unique feature that IBM did not account for and decided it was not in their best interest to advertisers. So they took the feature off. He said this accidental feature was thus removed from any future desktop computers. In order to take advantage of this feature, the 5100, I have now required a couple of special tweaks that had to be done by one of the software engineers in 1975. He says anyone who is familiar with this feature and was told to keep their mouth shut about it will be able to tell you what it is. This guy, Oliver Williams, who was on a show in 2012, said some IBM engineers came forward and said, I don't know if that guy was a time traveler or not, but everything he said about that machine is true. And
wow,
maybe only 20 people knew about it.
that's kind of awesome.
So that I love, that's pretty crazy to me. So there's also one more thing I want to discuss. There is a girl that came pretty close to John Titor. Her name is Pamela Moore. She was kind of a quote-unquote contact for him. And she, asked a lot of detailed questions. And I don't know if she kind of became like a checkpoint person. I don't really know. But there was they even had a secret song they used to identify, to make sure that they were who they claimed to be, with each other. And I mean, we're talking about stuff that she's still talking about in just literally January of this year. So I don't, and I'm trying to find my notes where it shows what she's saying, but this is where we get to the point where people are kind of debating on if this is the actual real John. A lot of other people have stepped up and said they are also communicating with John. But Pamela Moore seems to be the most credible, and she claims that she's met several of the Johns that have been traveling back and forth trying to get these computers.
So she's Sarah Connor, is that what you're saying?
Kinda, but not really the mother, more of just a touch point person.
But he could be Reese and she could be Sarah Connor. See,
True,
you don't know.
True. So I guess every time John has a touch point with her somewhere, he has a song he has to sing to prove that he is the real John Titor. So, and she said that that's happened to her several times, and yes, that she has had contact with several Johns. So anyway, that's, kind of where we are. Like I said, there's been a couple of stories from the last couple of years that have come forward, and after reading them, I decided not to really share them because if I'm doubting it, it's probably a little too far down the rabbit hole than even the show should go. But I have to tell you, since I've been reading this since 2010, I've done, I've gone on to a lot of skeptic interviews about it. I've gone on a lot of people that believe it just heart and soul. I've actually looked at lists that show like his predictions that have come true. And maybe they didn't come true in the exact date he said, but they actually, give it a few years, do happen. Mm-hmm. I think it is absolutely possible that this guy is telling the truth. There's just so much detail. And I don't know. He's, when Art Bell started questioning him, and he questioned him for years back and forth when this guy would come back and forth and say, well, he's John, he's a different John. And he gives, the same answers, but of course that's probably the same dude. But just so much detail that it's so hard for me to wrap my brain around. I mean, when somebody comes up to me and asks me, what's the what is the food industry like in 2036? I mean, you would either literally have to believe this is true and it's not, or you would have to actually, this is true, for it to give the answers that this guy is giving. So he either honestly believes that he's from the future and he's not, or he is actually from the future, in my opinion. I mean, that's kind of how I've walked away with it after 7 years of reading this story. What do you think?
Well, as an enormous fan of the first two Terminator films, I just really hope the T-1000 doesn't ever catch up to him.
It should.
Or we may never know,
Hey, they just invented Saudi Arabia just gave citizenship to a robot, like like a girl, she's she's not a robot. Looks like a person, but she's not. And now she says she wants to have babies. So, hey,
that's a good idea. That's a little freaky, but yeah. A little ex machina shit going on there.
Maybe her great grandbaby's going to be the T-1000 or whatever that there you
go.
That robot.
She could be the female one in some of the shittier films. Yeah,
exactly. I don't know. I love talking about time travel. I'm really fascinated with it. I think it is something that if I was going to travel in time, that I would want to go forward and possibly try to get past this barrier. Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, in a heartbeat. I'd do it in a heartbeat.
Would you have concerns about the repercussions, though? Like, what if you couldn't get back? Like, what about those kind of things?
Yeah, I'm willing to take the chance. Take the chance. That's just, I'm too nosy and curious, and I need to know, what's going to happen. I think the biggest part for me about dying is I'm not going to know, I want to know what's going to happen in the next 200 years. And so that, I don't mind dying, but the part that pisses me off about dying is the fact that I'm not going to know what's going to happen in 200 years, Yeah. So, or maybe we die and we go to another dimension, which is, a part of my belief, and we can come back when we want, but to not be partake in it, I think, is what really bothers me. I want to be in a spaceship and travel to Jupiter or whatever, and I'm like,
so then if you could live forever, presuming a healthy-ish life, no sicker than you are, basically, when you have the flu, would you do that?
I wouldn't want to live forever. I'd want to live for 1,000 years, I think.
Holy
and
balls.
Then I'd probably be tired. All right, I'm ready to die now. But, and actually, I can't remember if, I think he does say that the people that have traveled forward in time have told him that, because he has personally not traveled forward, I believe, he literally was hired to travel to find this machine, so he's not just rolling around playing with the machine, he's actually trying to do a job. But what his communications were about the future is that we do end up curing most disease and people live a lot longer. You basically kind of know when you're ready to die, and you just say, okay, I'm ready to die. And so they'll kill, you die, but you live for a long time. And, if you get sick, it's, fixable. They give you new body parts, renew the body parts you have, and then you just your life just kind of runs its course and you're ready to go. So he did say something like that. It was very briefly described, but because he personally hasn't witnessed it, but that's what he's been told is going to happen in the future. So, hey, I'm just pissed it won't be me, I want to hang around and see what's going to happen in the future. That's a big pet peeve of mine. I don't care if my body rots in the earth. A lot of people have like a fear of death. None of that bothers me, but it bothers me that I'm not going to know when we're getting those damn flying cars.
I don't want a flying car. I just want a goddamn self-driving car, and preferably before my daughter learns to drive, because oh my God.
No kidding. Tell me about it. Honey, mine drives in a year, so you're preaching to the choir. But anyway, one more thing we'll cover really quick that you briefly talked about was we do have the traveling hipster, which, yes, that has been somewhat debunked. Some people still swear he's a time traveler. I just wanted to get your opinion. I mean, I don't care either way. He doesn't blip on my radar per se. He's just comes up all the time when you research time travel. He's like one of the first things that pops up. So had to include him. It's a crazy
photo, and he is a younger person than the other people in the picture, which already makes him stand out. But they did say that sunglasses were not unheard of in that time period. They just were, not as, it's not like nowadays where everybody's wearing sunglasses all the time. And they said that the thing around his neck was, I forget what they said it was, but it was a technology that they did have back then, not a new age camera like people were saying that it was. And I don't know if you saw also the Charlie Chaplin film where it looks like someone is talking on her cell phone.
Well, I thought that was debunked to be a hearing device.
As well.
Yeah. Like
so a lot of them have been debunked.
Well, I mean, come on.
Plausibly.
How can you possibly say that's a cell phone? I mean, there are no cell towers. There aren't, what in the world should she be talking to?
Phone. How is she able to use it?
A brick. That one I was kind of like...
Unless you've seen like Inception and that's like her object that takes her back.
Wouldn't it be a little smaller? Like, wouldn't it be like a minute little device that isn't like a block? I mean, I don't know, but... of course, our cell phones are getting bigger these days, so maybe they actually come back into the block phase. But
yeah, we're going backwards. So.
I don't know if you saw, because I know how our document goes with the sculptures of the astronaut the appearance appearing to be like an astronaut in a sculpture.
Yeah, that was a weird one.
I find that kind of bizarre because it does exactly look like our astronauts to this day. So
like,
interesting.
Who would design something like that hasn't seen something like that,
And
it's
also the kind of bizarre thing is there is a picture, which I did not include, of somebody, and this was from the 70s, I believe, where a dad or a grandpa was taking a picture of a little girl, and when they developed the film, there was an astronaut kind of like floating behind her. And it's clear as day, and the film company has said this is not, this isn't double exposure. They did not edit this. This isn't legit. Whatever they caught is legit. Looks very similar to this sculpture as well from the ancient times. So we got that always. There's a lot of these stories that there just really isn't an answer for. And then the apparent computer found in the shipwreck is also another one that I think is pretty interesting. I think that probably there was quite a few ancient civilizations that were more advanced than we probably know. And that's a possibility that somebody was working on some sort of geared, machine back then that we just have never seen or heard because those things don't last. You don't have computer. We can't even get a TV that works for 10 years nowadays. So let's be honest with ourselves. There's probably a lot of that crap rolling around.
That's more by design, though. I think that's more so you have to get a new one, but that's a whole other can of worms.
Exactly. But in the theory that, they found this, they say it's a very rudimentary possible computer. Found in a shipwreck that's 2,000 years old. So, interesting. I mean, we got to sit down and think about, did somebody bring that? Is it aliens? Is it, were we just more advanced civilization than we realized from back then? Who knows? But
who does know?
A lot of
but
things
it's something to think about for sure.
Contemplate for sure. So I think we'll probably end our show on those, and we will post those photos and the stories on our show, so you can go back and read anything, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on it and what you think it is, and give us your answers. And you can call us crazy or whatever you'd like. It's, your journey. So with that, I would love to thank my co-host Moni for joining me.
I have to tease something though for next week.
Yes. Give it to us.
Next week, I am the person coming up with the subject matter, and we're going to talk about Charles Manson. And I don't know if I will be able to watch this. I don't have access to Reel's channel, but in case you guys want to watch along, because I would at least like to read up on this and find out more about it. I've done a lot of other research on Manson. I've listened to the You Must Remember This podcast, and I highly recommend it. It's the first season, and it's a lot of background, well-researched on Charles Manson prior to the murders, the things that led up to it, the murders themselves, and then, Polanski and all the things after the fact. Also the politics and just sort of what life was like in that era. But this documentary that's coming on Reels is actually airing as of our recording date today. Oh, so you guys won't be able to hear this. Duh. Sunday, December 3rd at 9 p.m. But maybe I'm imagining if they're going to put this much work, and it's kind of been all over the place because it's in conjunction with Rob Zombie, that when you guys hear this podcast on Tuesday, you might be able to get access to it. Reel's channel is Dish Network $2.99 and DirecTV $2.38. And I'm going to try to find some kind of way to watch it online as well. But it's called Charles Manson, His Final Words, and Rob Zombie is the narrator, and it actually has some of Manson's thoughts all the way up through July of this past year. And so that's pretty recent as far as, didn't hear a lot from him after sort of his trial died down and he's been in jail for all these decades. So it's kind of interesting. And I just feel like just looking at the preview for it, that it's going to really piss me off because it looks like they're trying to say that there's no way Manson could have been involved with the murders.
What?
And so yeah, exactly. That might upset a lot of people, but it's a point of view that I'd like to at least read up on and bring to next week's show. And I do have some delicate questions to ask, so it's going to be a thought-provoking podcast next week. So be excited for that. But yeah, so check that out if you get a chance. And it's a timely topic since he just passed away a couple weeks ago. May he rot in hell either way.
Right.
Anyway, I'm looking forward to that podcast recording.
Awesome. Okay, and you want to end with how people can find you on the interwebs?
Sure. I am Moni Bear at Instagram, and I am Rebel Moni, MONY, on Twitter, and I've actually been tweeting mostly about politics, but still, there's a lot going on there too, so check that out.
Awesome. And you can find me on Instagram as Creepin' Christy and also as the Creepin' It Real Show. And on Twitter is at Creepin_it, or you can also search for the Creepin' It Real Show. And Yardley, I know across the board, is militant_marker, I believe it is.
Yeah.
He's pretty much across the board that. So we just want to thank you for bearing with us, and Miss Yardley, and hopefully we'll all three be back next week.
Well, the time has come, I hope that you're ready. Time to get moving, everybody rock steady. It's time, now it's time. Get on the ball, get on the right track. No time to lose, there's no looking back. It's time, I said it's time. Hey now, what you gonna do if that passes you by? You get left alone and wonder why. The time is now, no hesitating. You got the green light, tell me why are you waiting? It's time, I said it's time. Shake it up.